a seat. People coming in. Oh, okay. I didn't have a mask. Welcome everyone to the 2022 Fall Segue Series. I'm Stephen Motika of Nightboat Books. I want to start off by thanking James Sherry for inviting Nightboat to curate the Segue Series this October and November. So this is the first of 8 readings that Nightboat will be in charge of, and I'm thrilled that it brings Allison Cobb and Camille Roy to read here in New York, which is so exciting because both of their beautiful, profound, amazing books of poetic prose came out in pandemic 2021. Both were on the West Coast and did wonderful things out there, but we're really, really fortunate to have them here in New York to read for us. So thank you for traveling, both of you. It's just a treasure to have you here. And I hope you'll come back next week, same time as Kimber Lidio and Ray Armentrout. October 15th is Andrea Abikaram, and then we're going to do a little Lusophone celebration. Eduardo Kotz reading bilingually in Portuguese and English from his Pornia, Porn Poems from 1980 and 81, and then Montana Ray reading live with Yuri Cruz, a Afro-Brazilian poet who will be beaming in from Rio de Janeiro. And then October 22nd, Samia Bashir and Jasmine Gibson. And the weeks just go on, one great reading after another. So please check our website. If you want to sign up, follow us on Instagram. We're sending reminders. We're going to send e-blasts, follow Artist Space. In addition to James, I also want to thank Lonely Christopher at Segue. Thanks also so much to Artist Space for hosting us. We're grateful to Jay Sanders, Rizarta Safari, and Stella Silman for their help producing these readings. I know many of you know us, but I'll just say quickly that Nightboat Books is a nonprofit publisher of provocative works of experimental poetry and prose based right here in New York. The Nightboat staff is thrilled to be collectively curating the Fall 22 Segue series and to share the dynamic work of its authors and friends. Representing a range of aesthetic and political backgrounds, all united by rigorous, gorgeous risk-taking and their remarkably stunning poetic visions, whether in poems or prose. You will be seeing me and my wonderful colleagues up here through the 8 weeks. And I want to just give a shout out to Lena Bergamini, Gia Gonzalez, and Kaylin Nardone for helping put this together, and just a big thank you to them. So I also want to point that we have books available at the table. We also have our gorgeous tote bag, our Faggots tote bag in bright revolutionary red, which just arrived from the printer. So please pick one up. And if it's not raining tomorrow, please come visit us at the Brooklyn Book Fest, where we'll have lots of books. It's a delight to first welcome Allison Cobb, the author of 2 books of poems, but also my favorite adventure creator in the world of documentary essay. Her book Greenwood, which we were lucky enough to re-release in 2018, is a masterclass in the poetics of place, a deft environmental history, an analysis of American empire and colonial endeavors as told in the city's most storied garden cemetery. For her next book, in the research vein, Over a Decade in the Making, Allison tells the twin story of the rise of plastic and the atomic bomb in the last century. The resulting book, Plastic and Autobiography, tessellates a myriad of histories, seemingly disparate lines of inquiry that all converge at Los Alamos, the birthplace of the bomb and of the author herself. The book is Allison's exploration of the grief of the devastation and a legacy of the bomb, but also the escalating destruction by the plastics industries in places such as the Gulf Coast, where towns are being destroyed by the plastic industry. In Plastic, the poetics has morphed into a passionate politics, a cri de coeur, reminding us of the complexity and pernicious acumen of industry and capital. But this is also a book of pleasure. It's a mystery story too, a love letter to reading and research and finding community. Plastic and Autobiography is the work of a poet, an intricately built serial investigation of the world of plastics, from its carbon structures to beach-filled debris left behind. It is also an examination of self, a rigorous interrogation into the legacy and lineage of Western science and capitalistic excess. I was lucky enough to witness Allison construct this book and return again and again to revise and refine this masterful text. The endnotes and citations alone are a list poem. I'm so glad this book is out in the world, finding readers and fans, and so glad it brings Allison in person to New York. Plastic and Autobiography won both the Oregon Book Award and the CLMP Firecracker Book Award. John Freeman, in his citation for the first of those awards, writes, "In the long shelf of books interrogating our moment in the climate crisis, this memoir is a sharp, urgent breakthrough, a triumph of honesty." Please join me in welcoming Allison Cobb to Segue.
I'm a little speechless. That was such a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to do this for a minute. I think I'm probably good. How's my sound back there? A little louder? Like that. Okay. Thank you. A lot of times these podiums are made for taller people. I need platform shoes. Well, I just am so grateful to you, James, and everyone at Segue for continuing to do this series over many years. I've had so many wonderful experiences here in poetry, and to Stephen and everyone at Nightboat for being so generous to me over so many years. This book, Plastic, would not be nearly the book it is without their editorial care and their belief in it and their concern and nurturing it along before and after it came out. I feel so incredibly fortunate to get to be part of the Greenwood group of authors. And I wish I could just stay here for the month to see all the readings because they sound just incredible. So, and thank you all for being here on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Seems like Ian has maybe departed now, I hope. So I'm just going to read from the first section of this book, Plastic and Autobiography. As Stephen was saying, it's written in these short chapters that interweave a bunch of different themes. And I made a challenge for myself in reading from it because I can't just read like the first 15 pages or something because you would be completely bewildered. It starts a bunch of different threads and weaves them together later in the book. So I have to pick and choose, but I'll start with a preface, which gives you a pretty good overview of what the book is doing. It starts with an epigraph from Rebecca Solnit. I wanted to trace the lost patterns that came before the world was broken and find the new ones we could make out of the shards. The thing turned up in a corner of the yard just outside the fence. I found it when I went out to take Quincy for a walk. Curved and black, plastic, 4 feet long, a foot at its widest. I thought at first it was a car bumper. I put it in the grass by the porch. The next morning, it was still there. I sat next to it in the sun and looked closely. It was not the first piece of plastic junk I had sat staring at. For nearly a year, I'd been picking up all the plastic I found on my daily dog walk. I'd been arranging it into patterns, taking photographs. I'd been storing it all up in plastic garbage bags on the back porch. I didn't know exactly why I was doing this. I wanted to understand something. Plastic on the dog walk, plastic on visits to the beach, plastic studding the ground everywhere I looked. I gathered it all up. I am the no and the yes. A line from the poet Hannah Sobelman's first book. It has lived with me for years, sometimes whispering through my mind in its old remembered rhythm. In the poem, Sobelman follows the line with a qualifying phrase. She narrows it, makes it domestic, but I want the raw declaration hanging there on the turn of itself. I am the no and the yes. For nearly half my life, I've worked for an environmental group. I spend most of my days in front of a computer screen, taking in a deluge of information about planetary trauma and emergency. Most of it floods through me, too vast to grasp. But plastic was a shard that stuck. Plastic I could touch, and it could touch me back. On this day, as I sat beside the car part, I was thinking about the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, his essay called The Thing. His book, Poetry, Language, Thought, had sat on my shelf unopened for more than a decade since graduate school. A few days earlier, on a whim, I picked it up. Heidegger writes that distance disappears and all things come equally close because of technology. In 1949, when he wrote the essay, he meant airplanes, the radio, TV. These inventions bring everything before us in image and sound. Ancient Egyptian pyramids, a cat in Japan, glaciers shearing off into Arctic waters. Everything flattens out, a uniform distanceless, as he calls it. But this does not make anything present. The only way to approach a thing, to bring it near, is by sidling up to it, by thinking around or through what appears obvious. He performs this kind of meditation on the thingness of a clay jug. I thought of meditating on this car part. It had a smooth surface, shiny. One side was flecked with light splash marks from mud or paint. It formed a complicated shape, wide at one end and tapered at the other, with holes and slats and ridges all along its length. The widest end contained deep score marks, some scratched all the way through the plastic. It was stiff, but still pliant. Without the car body to hold its curved shape, it folded in half like a wing at its narrowest point. The image that came to me was an albatross carcass bursting with plastic. This was the first shard that stuck, a snippet in a news story about a piece of plastic from World War II found inside a dead albatross chick 60 years later. It stayed in my mind for years, like the no and the yes. I dragged a car part inside the house. Nearly 10 years later, it sits beside me near my desk. I learned this, that the world is not broken, or that it has always been shards, kaleidoscopically interwoven, not one world, many threaded through one another, like fungus hyphae through soil. Worlds end. As Catherine Yusof points out, in a billion Black Anthropocenes or none, some worlds have ended over and over, lives consumed and discarded by individuals woven into systems that give them life and death power. Like settler colonialism, like capitalism. These are systems built by humans, but they exceed individuals. They extend across generations and geographies, planet-scale forces of destruction. Plastic waste stems from this consume and dispose violence. I learned that waste is not an unintended consequence of a miracle new technology. Waste is inherent in plastic production as it accelerated after World War II. In 1945, days before the US military incinerated 2 cities with atomic bombs, a DuPont executive looked forward to the end of the war and the surge of buying that would follow as soldiers returned home and bought houses and cars, washing machines, and refrigerators. The job ahead, he told a group of marketing experts, see to it that Americans are never satisfied. Plastic embodies this. Thank you for laughing, James. I think that I'm funny. My topics tend to be very dark, and sometimes people are like, but you reward me by laughing. I'm going to shove my sweater in this handy little compartment. Let's see, where was I on this dark journey? Oh, yes. Plastic embodies the infinite desire to never be satisfied. Conjured out of gas and oil, the seemingly endless reservoirs of dead plants and animals underlying Earth, plastic transmutes death into eternal life. The word plastic refers not to any specific object, just the quality of a material, that it is capable of taking shape, an endless stream of shapes. Objects formed from plastic ease suffering and save lives. Artificial hearts, IV bags, the tubes snaking out of a respirator. Plastic makes cars safer, airplanes lighter, and delivers drinking water. The single largest use of plastic, though, is for containing other objects. 40% of plastic goes into packaging to be used once and then discarded, driving endless demand for more. Companies work to keep these facts hidden. When the evidence becomes too overwhelming, plastic clogging roadsides, oceans, living bodies, companies shift responsibility onto individuals through things like anti-littering campaigns and ensure that taxpayers and municipalities pay the tab for managing the waste. The lives harmed at every step, human and non-human, drop out of the equation. The same consume and dispose violence threads through me also. It has benefited me my whole life. I grew up the daughter of a nuclear physicist in Los Alamos, the town that built the atomic bombs, which ended some lives in order to save others perceived to have more value. We are woven into the same net, me and bombs and this car part. For a decade, I followed threads that tie us together through airplanes and sailors, the hydrogen bomb, Pacific Islands, the Nazis, and Heidegger. I followed threads through silence, loss, and grief, through the birth of chemistry and the invention of radar, through patriarchy, empire, and chattel slavery. I followed threads through apologies and their failure, through a pandemic and an uprising and living lungs struggling to breathe, through old wounds and new ones, hurt reverberating, aching to be remembered. This object, a book and its journeys, this broken down car part, its life. This is my no. I have wanted this car part and its entanglements, often ugly ones and painful, to leave me. I have wanted not to have to face in my privilege the terms of its existence. I learned this: there is nowhere to go. The same terms that made this piece of plastic made me, my own body, and each of my breaths. This is also, it must be, my yes. Okay, so that's the first part. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I also wanted to say thank you to another person here who is Andy Fitch, who is an editor at Essay Press, who published the very first chapbook of plastic in 2015, which helped me to figure out what I was doing and also to continue for another 6 years to actually finish the book. So thank you. I'm also very excited to get to read with Camille Roy, who I've admired for a long time. This is a dream lineup for me. I might read one more little section, like half of a section from this book. The book in part chronicles my journey to figure out the origin of this car part. And I did a whole bunch of like research and talking to people. I was going to bring it with me. It's like this big and it fits into a roller bag. But I was just saying to Stephen that I could either pick the car part to go in the roller bag or my clothes. So I went with the clothes, for better or worse. So this is just a little bit of my journey to try to find the origin of this car part. On Monday, I tried the Portland number for American Honda Motor Company. A woman whose name I didn't catch picked up. I told her I found a large Honda part in my front yard. I explained that I was writing a book about plastic and that I'd like to trace the origin of this car part. She listened in silence, then transferred me to the parts department. Selena picked up. I told her my story. She suggested I call Honda corporate headquarters. What do you make there? I asked. We don't make anything, she told me. We're a parts supplier for dealers. I decided to be a little persistent. So you don't think that if I brought in the part or read someone there what was on it, they could tell me anything about it? She asked me to tell her what it said. She sat in silence while I read off the long strings of numbers. The first one is a part number, she said. The rest, I have no idea. These come from Japan. It was a pronouncement that seemed to seal the mystery. Do you think anyone else there might know? She sighed. Let me check with my manager. She was gone for a while. I could imagine the conversation taking place in some office nearby. She came back. My manager says, you need to talk to Honda Corporate. They can answer all of your questions and give you everything you're looking for. But I knew that Honda Corporate could not give me everything I was looking for. I brought this dirty plastic car part, this piece of garbage, into our house. It sat in the living room for a long time until Jen asked how long I planned to keep a car part in our living room. I moved it into the bedroom on the floor near my side of the bed. It made a flat clap against the floorboards when I tripped over it, which I did almost every night. I wanted it to speak to me. I wanted it to tell me something about how to live now on this planet, in this real life, as a member of the human species. I wanted it to tell me what to do about being alive in a dying world where being alive is monstrous, where the terms of every breath seem to be death. I wait. For what? A sign. For an albatross to wake from my chest and take flight. But it remains here with me and this car part, its dirty carapace curled around me. There's no gap between us, no out there to access by microscope or imaginative vision. Here we are, together, and the industrial chemicals we share, the resonating molecules of our bodies. So luckily for me, as a poet, I discovered after some more research that the car part came from a Honda Odyssey, the very first Odyssey minivan made in the US. And that launched me on an odyssey across the country to return the car part to Lincoln, Alabama, which is where all the Honda Odysseys in the world are made. I dragged my partner and child cross country. So I won't tell you what happens at the factory. You have to read it to find out. Then in honor of Camille and her book Honey Mine, which is a book about love in many ways, I thought I would read a few poems from a new manuscript of poetry that are about love. I mean, I think the plastic book is a little bit about love for the car part, but this is love among people, thwarted love, love and loss, love and death, maybe even happy love. So I'll read just a few of these poems. This is called On Loss, and it's dedicated to Prince, the musician. This world span rain. I mean, how the breath can quit. It comes and goes. You don't believe it stops. That mark stays on your face, that face that died in your chest. The one who lost the limb, cut off to stop the greedy tumors. Did she think of how it looked, the toes she once could stare at, pick? She felt its ghost foot walking earth, which is a fading thought. She died, they said, by falling from a height, one-legged, while dancing. Some say, though, she jumped. A single cell consuming light becomes from centuries of want millennia's slow drip, a human form, a prince. His mouth and eyes, his chest, the sound he tears up from inside him, shriek that tugs my guts from the soil of fuck and fight. Dance that filled my hips, the bone bowl brimming up. No, I never felt this wordless mouth. I did. It lit me to my core. I burned a wick of want. After you, all one can do is die, but I fell to the fear, my shame, of the tongue that flames from the center, firing through miles of rock. I snuffed that spark myself. This dark, it's loss. And staying on the theme of thwarted love, this is called The Flying Thing. A wasp, black, all black and velvet dark. Its antlers, no, antenna, curled, extravagant in curlicues, wings folded over it, a bright, arresting orange and smoke, translucent almost to its darkness, to its thorax, dead. It caught my eye, bright, lying still in dirt. She picked it up, its body in her long, scarred palm. We looked for all we wanted, all it was. I wanted something big, to be hunted, chased, and killed, or almost to be emptied from the skin. But it lay still, an insect, dead, nothing after all. She moved to smash it in her palms, a cocky, careless joke, but then she opened up and let it drop, the wasp. We left it and forgot. Her hands went back to something else. We walked. I wanted to be bit. The scar there burning on her palm, jagged star, a bite from one who loved her long ago, the mark of his desire, desidere of the stars, those enormous fires lighting up my little meat, the hair nest made of want, a monkey caged that she had studied. He only missed her, so he bit. The wasp, I remembered later, looked it up. I remember every instant standing near her bitten flesh. So help me drop that stinging want. Pepsis formosa tarantula hawk, largest of the wasps, its sting most painful of all insects. It even stings in death, so she was lucky not to clasp it close. Only females sting, of course. Her weapon, tiny needle jutting from her ovipositor, the gun through which she shoots her eggs. And she targets any hapless, hairy spider, so it's paralyzed with pain, but still alive. She drags it to a hole, stuffs it in. That's the term. She stuffs the spider in a hole and lays her eggs on it to feed on living spider flesh, a nest. My home state's official insect, but I'd never even heard of it. Now I'm doomed to always know this. Tiny eggs I didn't choose, more beautiful than facts still growing in my skin, lovelier than we will ever be again. She let the wasp drop from her palm. I left her standing at the door, hands completely bare. I froze that self, then buried it. I won't be back there. And then the last one I'll read is called Be This Alive. Cover me in spit and dirt. The word in German for greed means the having disease, means I mean to suck. Your born name means nothing to me, but your mouth I take shape in, swallow. I spit back my whole life, every word out my mother's mouth. In death, I only could know her as body, cold forehead. I put my lips against mom and feel for no signal there, not even echo. I dream the food rots, seeds drop, the teeth, ugh, soft. But this, she came back to talk. The body, she said to her best beloved friend after she died. She wasted no time to say this. Delight in it. Letters lit me as text. Her friend said, she said, tell them, tell my daughters. So heeding her after our whole lives, I say, flood in tongue, love, I want your wet muscle, want fingers, want skin, it all in, for funk, smell, finger, blood from me. Feel for joy right now, she said, after she died. She came back to say, you, be this alive. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Allison. We're going to take a 5-minute break and be back for Camille Roy.
Touch fire. You could fly. It was your right. It was your she's this overwhelming clean feeling, strange serenity. When I saw the girl look just like me, and it broke my heart the lengths you went to hold me, to get to have me, 'cause I haven't given you what you need. You wanted me but couldn't reach me, so you went into your memory, living all the ways you still want me. I haven't given you what you need. You wanted me but couldn't reach me. I'm sorry, it should have been me. I'd be going about my day until a hand would come and lift me out and drop me in the middle of a labyrinth where I'd be stuck a while. When I saw the girl look just like me, I thought must be lonely loving someone trying to find their way out of a maze. Oh, I know. I haven't given you what you need. You wanted me but couldn't reach me, so you went into your memory, lived all the ways you still want me. I haven't given you what you need. You wanted me but couldn't reach me. I'm sorry, it should have been me. I'm sorry, it should have been me.
We're going to begin again, so if you could please take your seat. If you are watching on Zoom, we hope that you'll be inclined to make a $5 donation on the Segue website or through Venmo. These funds go to our wonderful readers, and we're really grateful if you feel comfortable doing that. And I now am honored and excited to invite my colleague, Lena Bergamini, up to introduce Camille Roy.
You say you love me, I believe you do. But I walk down and up and down and up and down this street, 'cause you just don't love me.
I want to start by giving a huge thanks to everyone who came out tonight, and thank you to Allison. I can't see you. I thought you were there, but that was really incredible. Wow. Also, thank you to Artist Space and Segue for hosting us. I'm honored to be introducing Camille Roy. Camille Roy's prose disrupts categorization. Her writing is both disorienting, sparse, and expansive in its understanding of gender, sex, and distinctly American ideas of race and class. I'm in awe of her capacity to portray passion, dissonance, and disorientation in the very structure of her prose. She is the author of numerous works of both poetry and prose, including Sherwin Forest, a collection of poetry published by Future Poem in 2011, the play Cheap Speech, Cracker, a fictional autobiography, The Rosie Medallion, which is both poetry and prose, and Cold Heaven, which is also a play. I've had the distinct pleasure to work on Honey Mine, her collected stories edited by Lauren Levin and Eric Sneathan, which Nightboat published in 2021. Honey Mine ushers readers into a lesbian coming of age through a tapestry of formally diverse stories told by and about Camille, who is the author but also not. Written from her experience growing up in Chicago's lesbian bars and S&M parties, and later San Francisco's queer scene, where she became involved in the new narrative movement. Her work tells the stories of surviving and thriving under dangerous conditions. I find myself in awe of the expansiveness of this collection. It ranges from interwoven and intimate letters to textured vignettes. The book never stops being sharp, even when it is sexy, and yet also has space for lushness. Documenting adrenaline-filled escapades as well as meditative moments where Roy mourns the death of her long-term partner, whom the book is dedicated to. Camille continues to be a crucial figure in the new narrative movement and an inspiration to queer experimental writers.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. It's really exciting to be here. I want to thank Allison Cobb for a wonderful reading. I was so excited to read with her, and I was right. That was wonderful. I want to thank Nightboat publicly for being a fabulous, delightful, luscious, juicy, talented, and extraordinary press and group of people. It's just been such a pleasure, and it's such an adventure to produce this book. It's hard to even put into words how great it's been. So, hey, thank you. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank James Sherry for being such a true spirit of poetry with the series for so many years that I remember from back in the 90s when I used to come here. I always found it very kind of inspiring and intimidating. So to be here is really exciting. Okay, so what I want to do tonight is I want to sort of hopscotch through some different kinds of material and not go on forever. Okay, so I'm going to start with most of one of the Agatha letters, which are a series of recollections that are addressed in letter form. And I'm going through the book from beginning to the end. Dear Agatha, mostly it's boring to be a girl. You are a prisoner of your girlish appearance. You can't get outside. You are either with all the other girls studying themselves in mirrors as they dream of devouring meat, their own excess flesh, anything to get rid of it permanently, or someone is trying to stuff something weird between your legs. It's one or the other. I was clear on this. Being a mess gave me a kind of immunity, but it didn't make me stupid. Far from it. In truth, understanding roared inside me as regards to the whole situation of girls, although it didn't quite trouble me because I ignored trouble even when I was in it. In my characteristically vague but stubborn way, I disregarded the situation of girls. After all, I had never been inside anything, including appearances. I was too skittish. I never said no or yes. I trembled constantly, a hungry ghost. So when I pushed open the pink door of the massage parlor and found its yellow sateen couch coated with girls, and they were wearing bright 70s loungewear and waving cheerfully at me, I leapt over the threshold. I threw myself through the door as though to the accompaniment of timpani, a drum roll, the cacophony of hormonal triggers. It was the summer I turned 21. Some moments are perfectly lurid, but also fresh. That moment rose like a welt from its historical bed, and I fell in it. I was in love with my times, and that meant hate was interesting. Vietnam was over, but it had left residue. The mob in the street, which included everyone I knew. Anyone could join, so we did. Political life was filled with spite, and much of it came from us, or our kind. Each day took place within the margin between the passing hour and imminent collapse, for that was all that many of us believed in. Even the corruptions of the state seemed exhausted. Any small act of rebellion might be the final straw. It turned private desperation into a kind of festival. I'm digressing now from the specifics of the parlor, but I want to decorate this part of my story with another one, the story of Sarah and Sand. Sarah was political in the paranoid style of the times, and Sand was younger, impressionable. Sarah became involved in a particularly fierce ideological argument, and when she lost that argument, she claimed the entire revolution for herself. She turned herself into a cause. Sand remained faithful. Really, she clung to Sarah. She became Sarah's party of one. For a few months, no meeting or demonstration could occur without Sarah and Sand, bitterly silent, striking a pose that conveyed Sarah's heroic martyrdom and Sand's abject loyalty. This was widely understood as Sarah trying to haunt us with the ghost of her leadership, and it was annoying to everyone. Then, for a few months, they were rarely seen. When Sarah surfaced, she announced that she and Sand were going to leave town in a van and travel as gypsy witch communists. This was a subterfuge, for instead of leaving town, they wrapped themselves in toilet paper and lit it on fire. Sarah went up like a torch and died. Sand lost her nerve in the last instant and rolled frantically on the wall-to-wall shag. Still, her ear burned off, as well as the skin on one arm. She lay in a burn bath for a month. Then she was shipped home to be cared for by alcoholic parents. The war at home. It was luxurious, all that anger. It sprang forth everywhere, like the weeds of a wet, hot summer in Mississippi dirt. I still miss it. I believed in that anger, in its promises. I got through everything, any grueling adventure, because I was waiting for that anger to finally and completely arrive. A moment when the daily world would shimmer and crack into pieces, a broken mirror, and we would all run into the street, barking like dogs, free at last. I couldn't separate my ideas from my bad dreams. What was a good idea? A bright skeleton gleaming through burning flesh? But that was Sarah. She had ideas. Once I dreamed that she came to my bedside surrounded by dogs who were baying and leaping and quivering with excitement. I can't remember if she said anything or just looked into my sleeping face. Then they all ran off, flowing down the stairs in a pack and out into the silent street, gone. My eyelids slid up as I felt the pressure of her image. If it weren't for loneliness, I wouldn't have fucked anyone. I didn't want to participate in anything. I wanted to just watch. I mean, Camille wanted that. And the parlor was the best place for that for her, because in the parlor, the mouth of the world and the mouths of girls were pressed unusually close together. So the girls got to trick out something precious, something which the world didn't want girls to have. Information. This is how the world works, baby. Camille wanted her life illuminated by the information which the world told her she couldn't have. And whoring was perfect because it was like life, but more blunt. The world takes off its pants for every teenage whore. Is that real enough? Camille thought blunt meant no secrets, but she was wrong. There were plenty of secrets in the parlor, just different ones. Now we're shifting tone. This is from a story called The Faggot. The Faggot is actually the girl Camille, and as a kind of gay bashing, faggot is what she gets called. And she's been kind of dumped with this bohemian family in a Colorado town. And there are, in this section, she's starting a romance with a girl named Isabel. And she has kind of dragged Isabel to this house of this sort of like almost old school Paris lesbian couple. One of them is Mina Loy, the poet, and the other one is a sort of grande dame named Pussy. And one thing I will tell you is that, like in the boho family that Camille grew up in, her mother paneled the walls of their bathroom with Mina Loy poems and then covered that with saran wrap. So it's written in little sections, and this is called tea. They're as in going to tea. Mina met us at the door and walked us into the living room, where Isabel and I sat together on the claw-footed velvet couch. Pussy was standing next to the grand piano, her black slacks crisply pressed. She sipped something green, absinthe. Mina was wearing an ostrichy dress, the color of old film, with tatters or feathers hanging from it. It gave her a vagueness like Big Bird as she stumbled across the living room floor with our tray of jasmine tea and ginger snaps. It's remarkable. I can't believe it. Someone in this town knows my work, she said. You know Mina's work, Pussy repeated softly. What would I say about it now? I don't like it. She's about 16. I don't like it. It's a fishbone in my throat. It grates on my ear. With deliberate awkwardness, it occupies lyricism like an enemy territory. But that makes me return to it and savor it. It's my crush. Back then, I was too passive and suspicious to formulate an intelligent question, but there were lines I'd always wondered about. Your drifting hands, faint as exotic snow, spread silver silence as a fondant nun. What the fuck did she mean by fondant nun? But I didn't ask that. Instead, I mumbled how much I liked the work. I had never used the term the work before, and it was followed by a risky silence in which the ladies looked at me like disturbed cats. Isabel's cheeks were turning a tender red. The party was stranger than she had expected. This gave me a pang, which turned to nerve, and I splattered our gathering with another Mina Loy poem. Your chiffon voice tears with soft mystery, a lily loaded with sucrose dew, a vigil carnival. I love that, I lied, my voice cracking. It didn't matter. Isabel turned to me with a smile, all the fierce little prongs of her teeth displayed. I love it too, she said. Nina settled herself on the couch next to me and ran her cool fingers across my wrist. You're not from here, are you, dear? Oh, no, I said. She gave my earlobe a hard squeeze. It's excellent for the ear. Memorize as many poems as you can. That's my only advice. Then Pussy stalked to the turntable and put on something very old and sexy, Louis Armstrong's Mac the Knife. Nina raised her big head with its clean, broad cheekbones and strong brows, a beautiful face even near the end of her life. She stood up, held out an arm, and they began to dance. The feathered tatters of Mina's dress swaying against Pussy's black pants. We watched them. It seemed there was plenty of time. Sometimes it opens and sucks your eye down like a well. Time, I mean. And at the bottom are watery faces, like your own, but cold and probably more elegant. It was like that. Watching the two old women spinning across their love puddle back and forth in a sort of silent film loop. They seemed to forget we were there. Finally, Pussy told us to run along. Go prowl, girls, explore, anywhere you'd like. Mina half opened her eyes and whispered, upstairs is better. We walked stiffly through the hall. We began to run as soon as we were out of sight. The whole house, we had it. There was a moment of excitement when something may just as well have yanked me up by the armpits and through the ceiling, plaster crackling and falling everywhere. Of course, that didn't happen. I saw a white flash of Isabel's underwear, and then we were at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, where 4 large bedrooms were laid out in a square. What were they like? Pussy's bedrooms. People have asked me that. But people, get a clue. They were about as sexy as a 19th century bank. The bedspreads were white with nubs like towels stitched in a pattern of turkeys and Indians. Lace doilies sat on top of stout, heavily carved dressers. Isabel and I walked down the hall, peering into each room. Was this all there was? The beds were 4-poster and sat in the middle of their territories like forts. Then Isabel found the door to the attic. It opened with a creak and a soft push of new smells, dust and abandoned furniture, heat. Nervously, we climbed the narrow stair. It was dim at the top. The only light bled past the rim of a window shade, pulled all the way down, but it was enough to make the white porcelain doorknobs gleam. There were 12 porcelain doorknobs on 12 small doors. We opened each one. Each room held an iron bedstand and a dusty table. Only one of the beds had a mattress, and it was stained. The threads were worn in the dark places as though someone had lain on it for a long time, barely moving. Isabel sat on the mattress and traced the outline of the stain with her finger. What do you think this is? It looks like a body shadow. Someone died here or was an invalid? Maybe an insane aunt. Look at my arm, she said. I sat down next to her. I could smell the sweat under her armpits and a slight sweetness coming off her hair. Hair rinse, probably. I rubbed the spot she had pointed to gently with my thumb. It looked like it might hurt. A rash of tiny bumps had spread across her skin. She pulled at the hem of her dress where there was another red patch. Look, there's another one. You're getting rashes, I said, stating the obvious. I wanted to put off doing anything just for a moment. It's that feeling of being about to tremble under a coat of fresh paint. I leaned over and pressed my palms into my eyes, flooding myself with reds and oranges. Eyelids are a sheet of bloodied laundry. Inside, something to count on. When I raised my head again, she said, "You scratch it." So I ran my fingers around the perimeter of the red mark on her thigh. Then I dug in with my fingernail. What does it feel like? A hot spot. It happens to me. Don't worry about it. She was looking down at it, frowning. Do you want to leave? No. We sat for a while next to one another on top of that disintegrating stain. She said she liked the way it smelled up there, like dry roasted dust. She laughed, and I looked at her, and it seemed that her face had gone soft or had just gone somewhere, leaving behind 2 eyes and a pouch of skin. I tried kissing it. Her breath deepened. A sigh emptied out. I climbed on her hips, up on her white panties, and I sat there for a moment looking. It was so unfamiliar, a girl rolling between my legs and the little blast-offs in my blood. She gripped the mattress with both hands, arched her back, and it hit me. I could be anyone. What a blast. What a fucking relief. Curious, all of a sudden, I reached my hand down along my back and ass and reached for what was there, whatever it was, under the girlish white underwear, the fine black hairs, her impossible sour and wet surfaces. We were up there a while, years possibly. When we came down, Mina had left and Pussy was reading the Wall Street Journal at the dinner table. The dinner dishes had been pushed aside. When she heard us, she took off her reading glasses. "Hello, girls," she said. "Welcome to the ground floor." We stared at her stupidly. Pussy nodded at a book on the table. "This is Mina's Lunar Baedeker, the 1923 edition. A treasure, really. Someday it will be valuable. It's even autographed." She nudged the book towards me. "Camille, Mina wants you to have it. Now tell me, how did you come to know the work?" The question slid in like a fishhook. I understood perfectly, or thought I did. It was another variation of the question, how did you ever live? How, and now. I picked up the book slowly. I felt its spine with my fingertips. Suddenly, I was almost too tired to stand up. The truth sagged out of me. Pearl, that's my mom. She covered our bathroom walls with these poems. I see. Pussy knit her fingers together. Well, we loved having you. It's delightful having girls prowling around, and so unusual around here. She cleared her throat. We watched as red points formed on the tips of her cheekbones, and when she finally spoke, it was the driest thing I'd ever heard. Water without water in it, a dry spring bubbling up out of dry earth. She said, "We want you to come back." Mina insists. It would give her great pleasure. Next week? We stared at her again, but this time it was work. It's a grind discovering anything, even when you are a spy. You have to adjust. Finally, Isabel answered, almost sadly, "We will." So I'm going to read from the last essay, which is called Under Grid, which has bunches of sections. This essay is written for what was it written for? Rob Halpern and Robin Tremblay McGraw did a beautiful journal, and it was written for that. So yes, I'm going to read 2 sections. The first one is called, it's about underground communities, is really what it sort of circles around. Ghost story. One day, about a year ago, a book came in the mail. It was called When Ghosts Speak, and it arrived by mistake. No one had ordered it. The author, a devout Catholic, was on relaxed terms with that part of the spirit world which had not transitioned by entering the white light, her terminology. Her attitude towards ghosts was offhand and extremely assured. I scanned the book for a few moments before tossing it into the recycling bin. It turned out to be preparation for an odd incident which occurred a few days later. I was driving on 8th toward Potrero Hill when suddenly a dead friend was sitting next to me in the car. his familiar presence resonant in the empty space. You might say it made a ghostly noise, although he didn't speak. Just then, a rotary phone loudly rang. What to make of this? I reflected on my friend's life, which had been rich in unfortunate experiences. In fact, these were the kind of experiences which become lurid and deformed by representation. As a consequence, I feel attracted by the manifold protections of silence. But I will give one example, because the image it creates is, for me, so weirdly Christ-like. While sleeping in Golden Gate Park, my friend was once woken up by rats, licking the blood that seeped from scabs on his arms. Such stories burst from him in language that had so much vividness and energy it possessed its own uncanny life. When he died, I had to mourn the death of his language as something distinct from his physical death, a separate loss. Today, I think that the presence of death in life characterizes language. That is the most true part of the story I've just told. Like any native speaker, I handle English with a sense of ease. But over time, its uncanny aspect has become more present. Words are the oldest human objects which enter my daily life. Yesterday, I was reading some of the riddles of the Exeter book, and this word shone forth unchanged. Swasu, Schweip, Blaku, swift, Wosan for swift. I'm not construing death as an abstract barrier. It's more of a thin curtain drawn down over the churning mass of former times, always present, always invisible. As a joke, I once told a student that language was a zombie, acting alive but composed of dead parts. We both found the idea oddly satisfying. What does it mean to be close to a person's language? My friend who died had a way with it which meant anything could happen, many startling fabrications. Once he was going to Canada to attend a festival for skateboarders. Probably it was one of those extreme sports events. At the border, they pulled him into a room and showed him a printout from an American law enforcement agency that went on for pages and pages. It contained the details of all of his 31 aliases. I'm hesitant to characterize my experience of my friend's ghost as a delusion. That's not because I think that ghosts are real, or at least they are not exactly real. It is this: the obscurity of language makes the real quiver. So this essay goes on and just deals with different kinds of obscurity. And I'll read the section called The Obscure Community. Before I was an experimental writer, I was a lesbian. I still am, but as time has passed, my sort of lesbian, who came of age in an underground community, is passing away. I have the odd sense of being out of phase with any image of lesbian identity, in part because my beginnings were, or felt like they were, outside the representational boundary. The community I entered in Ann Arbor, Michigan in the mid-70s was undergoing a decade of extremity. That meant it was a convergence of collectives, prostitutes, union organizers, drag shows, radicals with history in violent parts of the weather movement, and bar life. These components combined and recombined across all boundaries to produce an ongoing show with propulsive elements of both shock and hilarity. The larger feeling was of having slipped into an exhilarating social life that I could not describe. We had collective existence and a political rhetoric, but our substance was invisible. This was partly a collective ruse for safety in a violently hostile society, but it was also structural and linguistic. The coming out narrative is supposed to make experience legible, but I have never been able to write about this period. I still cannot create sentences about the circumstances and time in which I came out. There are many conflicts and contradictions that stymie the project. Much of what happened cannot be discussed openly, despite the fact that decades have passed. Also, there were so many reversals of expectation in play that representation becomes confusing. Finally, there is the issue of how to navigate the extraordinary gap between private life, a secret community, and what is sloppily termed the world. Where was I living, if not the world? When I have tried to explore this period, I have ended up circling around the very issues that constrain my writing about it. The passage below is both a description and an enactment of this failure. It's a narrative of a past love affair during this period of extremity. In the excerpt, an effort at representation has failed, and in response, I end up examining taboo as a distortionary field, even as the writing shifts away from realism. Quote, "One could say that my attempt at realistic narrative is a surrender to nostalgia, for the representational failure of realism is well known. I will not disagree with that. However, nostalgia is the vehicle through which my past has survived. And I want to touch the past lightly so as not to disturb it, especially its dewish utopian qualities, although it was instability which made it secret and fresh. If light waves can be bent by gravity, scattered by reflectors, sucked up by the bottomless gravity of a black hole, if light can stretch or shrink time, language is bent. A taboo is a place where language deteriorates, becoming both supple and truncated. Camille's fall for Dusty sent her hurtling through the doors, butch, whore, incest survivor, into the sturdy, enigmatic presence of taboo. A taboo as presence is both everywhere and nowhere. Language bends around it. One experiences moments of hysteria as recognition seems to be slipping away. I can't believe you've been a prostitute, Dusty's mother wails into the phone. The powerful attraction of taboo is anti-linguistic. It stops meaning at the boundary. Privacy and insanity have this in common. Shared meaning drops away. So love thrust Camille inside an enigma. I write this, of course, out of nostalgia, to affirm horror as enigma and abstraction. She is the one who inhabits me and who familiarizes me with the universe. Her hands probe the sheer tunnel of flesh. She sheds the weightless freedom of the abstract. Unquote. To clarify this line, the powerful attraction of taboo is anti-linguistic. It stops meaning at the boundary. The boundary I'm referring to is not individual but communal. The ability of a community to seal itself is mysterious and powerful, even if temporary. All revolutions in values as well as governments begin in these underground spaces. This recalls a professional colleague of 20 years ago. Working on a year-long software project, it eventually emerged that our parents had been communists. Mine left the party after Khrushchev's condemnation of Stalin at the 20th Congress in 1956. His parents never left the party, and they also maintained their political involvement in a secret cell for decades, until their death. They never admitted this to their son. He found out by spying on them. Light and shadow, meaning and the secret cell. As a young man, my colleague protested fiercely against the Vietnam War, but was never otherwise politically associated. I also grew up with the silences of former communists, but it came with an enveloping community. Down the block from my home, there is a house built of pale brick and tall blades of light, windows. Every week, the fathers gathered there to talk politics, drink whiskey, and play poker. They were all ex-communists. Several of these men were engaged in civil rights lawsuits related to their period of communist affiliation that ran for many years. To me, these were infinite lawsuits, stretching from before my birth until after my death. I experienced them as markers of the edge of value. Beyond them was nothingness. I wandered around the house, fingering the blown glass eggs collected by our host's wife. They were heavy and glistened in my palm. I picked up one after another and peered into their depths, all floating veils and orbs of bright colors. I barely listened to the men, but it was enough. Thank you.